In 2012, a group of audacious criminals targeted Canada's most treasured commodity, maple syrup. Among them was Renaud Thériault, a former insider with knowledge of the Federation of Quebec maple syrup producers' strategic reserve. To Renaud, the reserve was a vault of liquid gold, guarded more by trust than security. The warehouse in St. Louis de Blanford lacked cameras, guards, and regular inspections, making it a perfect target for exploitation. Richard Vallières, the gang's ringleader, saw the syrup as an untraceable commodity. With his network in the black market trade, he knew the stolen product could be easily mixed with legitimate supplies and sold globally. Using Renaud's access, the gang siphoned syrup from 54-gallon barrels into unmarked trucks during nighttime operations. To avoid detection, they refilled the barrels with water, ensuring they passed routine checks. Over months, the gang transported thousands of gallons to hidden storage facilities and funneled the syrup into underground markets in Canada and the U.S. Each truckload brought them closer to their goal of millions in profit. But in July 2012, the Federation's annual inventory check revealed the theft. Inspectors found barrels filled with water instead of syrup, exposing the scale of the heist: 3,000 tons of syrup worth $18 million. The discovery sent shockwaves through the industry, but the thieves were undeterred. While the Federation scrambled to respond, the gang pressed on, determined to keep their operation hidden and their profits flowing. To them, the heist was more than a crime. It was a calculated triumph against a system they believed was vulnerable. The theft shook Canada to its core. Maple syrup wasn't just a commodity. It was a national treasure, a source of pride, and a symbol of the country's heritage. For the gang behind the heist, however, it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The syrup reserve was a vault of unguarded wealth, protected more by tradition than by security. This wasn't just a theft. It was an act of audacity that exploited the vulnerabilities of an iconic industry. The Federation of Quebec Maple Syrup Producers, FPAQ, stunned by the scale of the crime, quickly informed law enforcement. Investigators faced pressing questions. Who were the masterminds behind this meticulously planned heist? How did they gain access to the reserve? And most importantly, where was the stolen syrup? What began as a crisis for the Federation would soon unfold as a case study in criminal ingenuity and systemic flaws. At the heart of the plot was Quebec's maple syrup industry. Producing over 70% of the world's supply, the province was the epicenter of a global trade worth hundreds of millions annually. To maintain dominance, the Federation had been established in 1966, with its strategic reserve acting as a safety net for both producers and prices. This reserve, often compared to oil stockpiles in its purpose, stored millions of pounds of syrup to stabilize the market, releasing supplies in lean years and saving surplus in times of abundance. By 2012, the reserve held over 30 million pounds of syrup, spread across multiple locations in Quebec. One of these, a warehouse in St. Louis de Blanford, became the target of the heist. The rented facility stored thousands of 54-gallon barrels of syrup, each worth a small fortune. At $50 per gallon on the international market, these barrels represented an irresistible prize for the thieves who would come to see them not as Canada's heritage, but as liquid gold, ready for the taking. The warehouse's vulnerabilities were well known to insiders like Renaud Thériault, a former Federation employee who would later become a central figure in the heist. The facility had no 24-hour surveillance cameras, no biometric access controls, and minimal staffing. Barrels weighing approximately 600 pounds were left unmonitored between periodic inventory checks. This lack of oversight created an environment ripe for exploitation, a fact that Thériault knew all too well. To the gang, the operation wasn't just about wealth, it was about opportunity. Each barrel they moved without detection was another victory against a system they believed was too reliant on trust. Over the next few months, they would turn a seemingly impregnable reserve into the site of Canada's greatest theft. Little did they know, their actions would soon expose the weaknesses of an industry and spark a national reckoning. The Federation's tight grip on maple syrup production and trade was a source of frustration, for many producers. Its monopoly, upheld by strict quotas and pricing controls, left little room for flexibility or profit maximization. For some, it was stability. For others, it was suffocating. This simmering resentment birthed a black market where rogue producers bypassed regulations, selling their syrup at higher prices outside the Federation's purview. For a group of ambitious criminals, this underground trade wasn't just an opportunity. It was a lifeline for their audacious heist. The gang, led by insiders like Renaud Thériault and orchestrated by the resourceful Richard Vallières, recognized a golden opportunity in the St. Louis de Blanford facility. Rented in 2011 to store an overflow of the Federation's strategic reserve, the warehouse held 16,000 barrels of syrup by early 2012. Each barrel valued at $1,800 represented a jackpot waiting to be claimed. With nearly $30 million in product under one roof and minimal security, the facility was a vault of liquid gold, waiting to be drained. The gang saw the weaknesses immediately. Access to the facility required little more than a key, and records of who entered and left were inconsistently maintained. The Federation's reliance on annual inventory checks meant there were months of unmonitored access, creating the perfect conditions for a heist. Renaud, with his insider knowledge, knew exactly how to exploit these vulnerabilities. The operation began quietly. Using hoses and industrial equipment, the thieves siphoned syrup directly from barrels into waiting unmarked trucks. Each night, they worked with precision, ensuring that the barrel's outward appearance and weight wouldn't arouse suspicion. They replaced the missing syrup with water, confident that the substitution would go unnoticed until the next inventory inspection. Over the course of several months, they transported thousands of gallons of syrup to secure storage locations, where it was prepared for distribution on the black market. This wasn't just about greed. It was about logistics and control. Vallières, the mastermind, knew the syrup couldn't sit idle. He activated his network of black market buyers, who were eager to purchase the stolen product at a discount. For Vallières, this wasn't just a heist. It was a business venture. The syrup, once laundered through underground channels, would vanish into legitimate supply chains, making it almost impossible to trace. The plan worked, at least for a while. In July 2012, during the Federation's annual inventory check, inspectors began their routine examination of the barrels. At first, nothing seemed amiss, but as they lifted and measured, some barrels felt unusually light. Puzzled, they opened a few and were stunned to find water instead of syrup. What had started as a routine inspection quickly turned into a crisis. As the inspectors continued their checks, the scale of the operation became clear. Hundreds of barrels had been tampered with, their valuable content siphoned off and replaced with water. The theft had gone undetected for months, resulting in the loss of over 3,000 tons of syrup, approximately 6.6 million pounds, with a market value of $18 million. It wasn't just a financial blow. It was a disaster for the Federation's reputation. The revelation sent shockwaves through the Federation and the industry. How could such a massive operation happen under their watch? For Quebec's producers, it was a personal and economic attack. Maple syrup wasn't just a commodity, it was their livelihood, a cultural treasure that represented Canada's heritage and quality to the world. The loss raised urgent questions about the Federation's ability to protect its reserve and the implications for Canada's standing as the global leader in maple syrup production. For the thieves, the success of their operation wasn't just about what they had taken, it was about how they had managed to do it. Transporting thousands of barrels over several months required a carefully orchestrated plan. Trucks moved discreetly in and out of the warehouse under cover of night, their cargo hidden from prying eyes. Storage facilities were secured, and the syrup was gradually introduced into the black market. The sheer scale of the operation proved that this wasn't a haphazard crime. It was the work of a highly organized network with insider knowledge and logistical expertise. But the thieves had underestimated one thing: the determination of the Federation and law enforcement to uncover the truth. As the scope of the heist came into focus, the investigation began. and the gang's carefully constructed plan would soon face its greatest challenge. As soon as the Federation discovered the theft, law enforcement was contacted, triggering one of the most intricate investigations in Canadian history. For the thieves, this was the moment they had anticipated and feared. The gang had gambled on the Federation's reliance on periodic checks rather than continuous monitoring, knowing the absence of surveillance cameras and on-site guards made the facility an easy target. But now, the stakes were higher than ever. By the time the theft was uncovered, much of the stolen syrup had already entered the black market. Richard Vallières, the mastermind, ensured the syrup was funneled through a well-established network of buyers who were eager to bypass Federation regulations. To Vallières, the syrup wasn't just a product, it was the perfect commodity. Once repackaged, it became indistinguishable from legitimate goods, allowing it to cross borders and disappear into international markets. The discovery of the theft posed immediate challenges for law enforcement. How could they trace a product that had been intentionally laundered into the global supply chain? For the thieves, the key to success had been speed. Every night they worked under the cover of darkness, moving the syrup further from its origin and closer to profit. But now, as the investigation unfolded, their carefully orchestrated plan faced new scrutiny. The crime wasn't a spontaneous act of greed. It was the result of months, possibly years, of meticulous planning. Central to the operation was Renaud Thériault, a former employee of the Federation who knew the St. Louis de Blanford facility inside and out. Renaud's knowledge was critical. He understood the gaps in the Federation's security and exploited them to perfection. The facility had no surveillance, no advanced entry systems, and only required a simple key to access. For Renaud, this wasn't just an opportunity, it was a challenge to outsmart a system he believed to be complacent. Renaud's inside knowledge was matched by Vallières' ambition. Together they orchestrated a plan that combined logistical precision with sheer audacity. The rented warehouse held over 16,000 barrels of syrup, each weighing 600 pounds and valued at $1,800. For the gang, this wasn't just a heist. It was an industrial-scale operation that demanded discipline and expertise. Vallières knew the syrup's value on the black market and leveraged his network to ensure that it moved quickly and quietly. The first step was gaining access to the facility. With Renaud's help, the gang secured keys and studied the warehouse's routines, identifying the best times to strike. They worked in small teams, arriving in unmarked trucks to avoid attention. Instead of taking entire barrels, they used industrial hoses to siphon the syrup, leaving the barrels in place and refilling them with water. This clever substitution ensured the barrels remained visually and physically intact, delaying discovery for months. Night after night, the thieves operated with precision. They moved thousands of gallons of syrup, carefully transporting it to hidden locations where it would be repackaged and distributed. Each night's work required not just stealth but careful coordination. The barrels were heavy, the syrup was sticky and prone to spillage, and every detail had to be executed flawlessly to avoid detection. For the gang, the operation was a test of endurance and secrecy. They knew they were exploiting a system that relied on trust rather than vigilance. Vallières thrived on the challenge, orchestrating the logistics like a maestro conducting a symphony. But, even as they celebrated their success, they knew that one mistake could unravel everything. By July 2012, the Federation's annual inventory check finally exposed the heist. Inspectors lifting barrels noticed some felt lighter than they should. Upon opening them, they discovered water instead of syrup. As more barrels were inspected, the scale of the theft became apparent. 3,000 tons of syrup, valued at $18 million, had vanished. For the Federation, it was a crisis. For the gang, it was a ticking clock. The meticulous operation had bought the thieves time, but now the full weight of law enforcement was bearing down on them. What had been an audacious triumph was becoming a race to stay ahead of an investigation that promised to uncover everything. The Great Canadian Maple Syrup Heist wasn't just a crime. It was a showdown between ambition and accountability, played out on a stage as sweet as it was high stakes. Transporting the stolen syrup was both the most critical and the most dangerous part of the operation. For the thieves, it wasn't just about stealing the syrup. It was about moving it efficiently and discreetly to locations where it could be stored, repackaged, and sold. This required an intricate logistical network: warehouses, storage tanks, and, most importantly, buyers willing to deal in black market syrup. Richard Vallières, the mastermind behind the distribution, tapped into the existing underground market that had grown as a response to the Federation's rigid controls over production and pricing. Vallières saw the Federation's regulations not as a hurdle, but as an opportunity. The strict system had frustrated producers and buyers alike, creating a thriving black market where syrup could be sold at higher prices. For Vallières and his team, the theft wasn't just a way to make millions. It was a way to exploit a system many already resented. Once stolen, the syrup was quietly funneled into this market, often repackaged and mixed with legitimate supplies to make it virtually untraceable. The team's confidence grew as their operation expanded. Early on, they siphoned syrup from a few barrels at a time, operating cautiously to avoid raising suspicion. But as the months passed, their ambitions grew. Night after night, they targeted more barrels, increasing the volume of syrup. They moved in a single operation. With each truckload, their profits soared, but so did the risks. By the time the Federation discovered the theft, the thieves had stolen over 6.6 million pounds of syrup, enough to fill 13 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Trouble began to brew in July 2012 during the Federation's annual inventory check. Inspectors started to notice anomalies. Some barrels felt unusually light. At first, they dismissed it as a potential mistake or evaporation, but as they opened the barrels, the truth became clear. What should have been syrup was instead water. The gang's careful replacement strategy had delayed detection for months, but the scale of the theft was too massive to remain hidden forever. As more barrels were inspected, the extent of the theft was revealed. Hundreds of barrels had been tampered with, their valuable content siphoned out and replaced with water. The Federation was stunned. This wasn't just theft. It was a direct attack on an industry that represented Canada's cultural identity and economic pride. Maple syrup wasn't just a product, it was a symbol, and its theft was seen as a national crisis. The Federation wasted no time in contacting law enforcement, triggering a multi-agency investigation. For the thieves, the game had changed. What began as a calculated operation had now drawn the full attention of the Sûreté du Québec, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and other law enforcement bodies. Detectives faced a monumental challenge. The theft had spanned months, and much of the syrup had already been distributed through underground channels. Piecing together the evidence meant untangling a web of transport routes, storage facilities, and buyer networks. One of the investigation's first breakthroughs came from identifying how the thieves had gained access to the warehouse. It quickly became apparent that the operation required insider knowledge. The facility's remote location and lack of activity meant someone familiar with its routines had to be involved. Renaud Thériault, a former Federation employee, emerged as a prime suspect early on. His access to keys and intimate knowledge of the facility's operations made him an essential part of the plan. Surveillance and questioning confirmed his role, leading investigators to other members of the gang. While the heist itself was audacious, the logistics of storing and distributing the stolen syrup proved equally complex. Syrup is heavy, sticky, and difficult to handle, requiring careful storage to avoid contamination or spoilage. The gang needed large tanks and barrels to house their illicit haul, as well as secure locations to keep it hidden from authorities. Vallières' connections within the black market syrup trade were invaluable here. Producers and distributors seeking to bypass the Federation's regulations provided a network of buyers willing to deal in bulk quantities, ensuring the stolen syrup could be sold quickly and quietly. Despite their careful planning, the thieves had underestimated the scale of their operation. Moving millions of pounds of syrup, even discreetly, created logistical headaches and increased their exposure. As the investigation intensified, their once impenetrable operation began to crack under pressure. As investigators delved deeper into the theft, it became clear that this was no ordinary robbery. The heist was a sophisticated operation that capitalized on systemic vulnerabilities and precise insider knowledge. For the gang, the Federation's reliance on annual inventory checks wasn't just a loophole, it was the foundation of their plan. With months of unmonitored access, they had ample time to siphon syrup, transport it discreetly, and integrate it into black market supply chains. By the time the full extent of the crime came to light, the thieves had already dispersed much of the syrup. Over $18 million worth of liquid gold had been stolen, sending the Federation into a full-blown crisis. For the masterminds like Renaud Thériault and Richard Vallières, the months of careful planning and execution were paying off. But for investigators, the challenge was only beginning. Unravel the network, recover the stolen syrup, and understand how such a massive theft had gone unnoticed for so long. The Great Canadian Maple Syrup Heist remains a testament to criminal ingenuity. It wasn't an impulsive act, but a meticulously planned crime that required insider knowledge and logistical precision. The gang exploited the Federation's rigid but outdated systems, turning their weaknesses into opportunities. Yet, even the best-laid plans can falter, as the investigation would soon reveal. When the theft was first discovered in July 2012, it stunned both the Federation and law enforcement. Over 3,000 tons of syrup had vanished from the St. Louis de Blanford warehouse, valued at $18 million. Renaud Thériault, a former Federation employee, knew the facility's vulnerabilities better than anyone. The lack of advanced security, no cameras, no guards, and only basic locks, had made it an easy target. For months, the gang siphoned syrup into waiting trucks, leaving the barrels intact and refilled with water to delay detection. Law enforcement began by securing the crime scene and combing through every detail for evidence. Inspectors noted that the barrels themselves held clues. Water used to refill them contained chemical traces that suggested it was drawn from local supplies, narrowing the potential radius of activity. The lack of forced entry also pointed investigators toward an insider, someone who had intimate knowledge of the facility's operations. Renaud Thériault quickly became a primary suspect, his history with the Federation and patterns of suspicious behavior drawing police scrutiny. Surveillance on Thériault uncovered visits to known black market locations and suspicious activity that suggested he was involved in the sale of illicit syrup. But the operation wasn't limited to him. For the gang, transporting millions of pounds of syrup posed a monumental challenge. They needed trucks capable of handling heavy loads, secure warehouses to store the product, and buyers willing to purchase in bulk. The gang relied on Vallières' network to funnel the stolen syrup through underground channels. Vallières' connections ensured that the syrup disappeared into the global supply chain, where it could no longer be traced. Investigators focused on transportation records and eyewitness reports to trace the gang's movements. Surveillance footage from roads near the warehouse revealed unmarked trucks entering and leaving the facility at unusual hours. GPS data from suspected vehicles, combined with tips from locals, helped map the routes used to move the syrup. This led authorities to a network of hidden warehouses across Quebec, where some of the stolen syrup was stored. While the thieves celebrated their success, cracks began to show in their operation. Each move left behind a breadcrumb trail for investigators, who were piecing together the intricate web of logistics, buyers, and accomplices. For the gang, the stolen syrup represented a victory against the Federation's control. But as the investigation gained momentum, their triumph would soon be overshadowed by the tightening grip of law enforcement. One of the gang's key storage locations, a warehouse in Saint-Hyacinthe, became the first major crack in their carefully orchestrated plan. Police discovered barrels and large tanks filled with syrup that matched the stolen goods specifications. This facility, tied to individuals involved in the underground syrup trade, confirmed what the gang had been relying on all along. The black market would be their safety net. Here, the stolen syrup was repackaged and discreetly funneled into channels that bypassed the Federation's strict regulations, ensuring it would be almost impossible to trace. The thieves had taken precautions, but the police exploited their weakest link: communication. Despite using burner phones to coordinate their efforts, the gang's call patterns and locations left a trail. Investigators pieced together common numbers and cross-referenced cell tower data to build a network map. This digital trail pointed to the central figures in the operation, including Renaud Thériault, whose insider knowledge had been critical, and Richard Vallières, the operation's ringleader. Vallières was no stranger to high-stakes syrup deals. Known for his involvement in unauthorized sales, he had long navigated the shadows of the syrup trade. His reputation as a black market operator with the infrastructure to handle bulk quantities made him the ideal mastermind. Surveillance confirmed his pivotal role. Vallières frequently met with other suspects, coordinated shipments, and handled transactions that tied directly to the stolen syrup. One of his intercepted shipments even contained barrels bearing markings from the St. Louis de Blanford warehouse, a smoking gun for law enforcement. Yet the thieves had carefully planned their moves. They avoided using marked vehicles, spread the stolen syrup across multiple locations, and leveraged tight-knit black market networks that were notoriously difficult for law enforcement to penetrate. Producers and distributors in these circles often had their reasons for staying silent, viewing law enforcement as a threat to their livelihoods. For Vallières, this reluctance to cooperate was his shield, giving him the confidence to operate under the radar. Despite these challenges, the police made steady progress. By late 2012, after months of surveillance and analysis, they had gathered enough evidence to take action. Renaud Thériault, Richard Vallières, and Jean Lord, a warehouse owner who had stored significant quantities of the stolen syrup, were among the first arrests. For the thieves, the arrests marked the beginning of the end. For investigators, they were a turning point. Interrogations and plea deals started to reveal the breadth of the operation. What emerged was a sprawling network of accomplices, each playing a specific role. From siphoning syrup at the warehouse to transporting it in unmarked trucks and securing storage locations, the operation had involved dozens of individuals. Vallières' leadership had turned a bold plan into a functioning system. Yet, despite the arrests, the syrup itself remained elusive. Some of it was recovered from warehouses and tanks, but a significant portion had already been laundered through the black market, blending seamlessly into the global supply chain. For the Federation, the recovery of even a fraction of the stolen syrup did little to repair the damage. The theft was not just a financial loss, it was a blow to their credibility. Producers who relied on the reserve for stability questioned whether their livelihoods were truly secure. For them, the heist exposed vulnerabilities that no amount of recovery could fully resolve. For law enforcement, the case was both a victory and a stark reminder of the complexity of modern organized crime. The gang's ability to exploit systemic weaknesses, build a wide-reaching network, and operate undetected for months showcased a level of sophistication rarely seen. Even with arrests made, much of the stolen syrup was gone, a testament to the black market's power to absorb and obscure even the most iconic commodities. For the thieves behind the great Canadian maple syrup heist, the operation wasn't just a crime, it was a calculated gamble. They exploited an industry rooted in trust, a system built on the belief that no one would dare challenge its traditions. By the time the theft was uncovered, Renaud Thériault and Richard Vallières had turned their knowledge of the Federation's vulnerabilities into an audacious plot that shook Canada's maple syrup industry to its core. The arrests of Thériault, Vallières, and warehouse owner Jean Lord revealed the intricate planning that went into the heist. Thériault's insider access gave the gang an edge, allowing them to bypass the facility's weak security. Vallières, with his deep ties to the black market syrup trade, ensured the stolen product disappeared into underground markets. Together, they orchestrated one of the most sophisticated thefts in Canadian history. Despite law enforcement's efforts, only about one-third of the stolen syrup, approximately $6 million worth, was recovered. The remaining syrup had likely been mixed with legitimate supplies and sold through untraceable black market channels. Vallières knew this was his best defense. Once the syrup was repackaged and distributed, it was nearly impossible to distinguish from legal stock. His confidence in the system's inability to track the stolen goods proved correct. The investigation exposed not only the gang's ingenuity, but also the fragility of the Federation's systems. The reliance on annual inventory checks, combined with minimal security measures, had created an environment ripe for exploitation. The heist was more than a robbery. It was a spotlight on the gaps in a trusted industry. For Vallières, it was proof that even a tightly controlled system could be outsmarted. The Federation's response was swift but reactive. Advanced surveillance systems were installed, inventory controls were tightened, and access to facilities was restricted. These measures sought to prevent another such theft, but the damage had already been done. Producers questioned the Federation's ability to protect their livelihoods, while international buyers wondered if Canada's syrup industry was as secure as its reputation suggested. The heist also underscored the scale of the black market trade. For years, producers frustrated with the Federation's strict regulations had sought alternative ways to sell their syrup. Vallières and his network thrived in this environment, leveraging demand from buyers eager to bypass the Federation's controls. The stolen syrup became a case study in how black market economies can intertwine with legitimate industries, creating challenges that law enforcement was ill-equipped to handle. For the thieves, the heist wasn't just about money. It was a calculated challenge to an industry they viewed as complacent. Yet, even their careful planning couldn't shield them entirely. Vallières received an 8-year prison sentence and a $9.4 million fine, with additional time added if he failed to pay. Thériault and Lord, while facing lesser penalties, still bore the weight of their roles in the crime. Their arrests marked the end of the operation but left a legacy of questions that would linger for years. The Great Canadian Maple Syrup Heist remains a symbol of both audacity and vulnerability. It revealed the ingenuity of those willing to exploit systemic weaknesses and the challenges of safeguarding even the most iconic industries. For the Federation, it was a wake-up call. For the thieves, it was proof of what could be achieved with precision, patience, and a deep understanding of the system's flaws. In the end, the crime left a lasting mark on Canada's maple syrup industry. The stolen syrup might never be fully recovered, but the heist's legacy continues to resonate as a reminder of how trust, when left unchecked, can become a liability. For Vallières and his gang, their bold operation will forever be remembered as one of the most ambitious and infamous crimes in Canadian history. The Federation of Quebec Maple Syrup Producers, long lauded for its control over the market, found its reputation under fire in the wake of the heist. Producers demanded accountability, questioning how such a massive theft could go unnoticed for months. To restore trust, the Federation introduced sweeping reforms. Surveillance cameras were installed, access to storage facilities was restricted, and barrels were individually tracked with unique IDs. Inventory checks became more frequent, aiming to reassure stakeholders that their product was secure. The theft sparked broader concerns about the security of high-value commodities. The Federation's reliance on trust and periodic checks had left it vulnerable, a lesson that reverberated beyond the syrup industry. Other sectors, including agriculture and resource management, began reassessing their safeguards, recognizing that even niche markets could attract organized crime if left unprotected. Globally, the heist temporarily disrupted maple syrup supply chains, causing a slight increase in prices. While the market eventually stabilized, the crime highlighted the economic importance of the Federation's strategic reserve and the risks tied to its mismanagement. For producers, it emphasized the need to strike a balance between regulation and adaptability to safeguard the industry's future. Meanwhile, the stolen syrup fueled an already thriving black market. By bypassing the Federation's controls, illegal distributors sold syrup at discounted rates, undercutting legitimate producers. The heist injected millions of dollars worth of syrup into this underground trade, making it nearly impossible to trace or recover. While authorities managed to retrieve some of the stolen product, a significant portion vanished into the global market, mixed with legitimate stock. This failure raised doubts about the Federation's ability to maintain its grip on the industry. The legal consequences for the ringleaders were severe, but not without controversy. Richard Vallières, the operation's mastermind, was sentenced to 8 years in prison and fined $9.4 million, with an additional 6 years added if he failed to pay. Renaud Thériault and Jean Lord, who played supporting roles, received reduced sentences in exchange for cooperation. Critics argued that the penalties fell short given the scale of the crime and its lasting impact on the industry. The Great Canadian Maple Syrup Heist left a lasting legacy, exposing systemic vulnerabilities and reshaping how high-value commodities are protected. For the Federation, it was a harsh lesson in the importance of vigilance. For the thieves, it was a bold challenge to an institution they believed was untouchable, one that, despite the arrests, left its mark on the industry forever. The great Canadian maple syrup heist didn't just disrupt the industry, it captured the world's attention. Its unusual target and the sheer audacity of the crime turned it into a cultural phenomenon. Dubbed the Great Canadian Maple Syrup Heist by the media, the story quickly spread beyond Canada, appearing in outlets like the New York Times, BBC, and The Guardian. The irony of syrup, a staple of breakfast tables and a symbol of Canadian identity, being stolen on such a massive scale made headlines that were equal parts humorous and shocking. The heist gained even more attention in 2018, when Netflix's Dirty Money series featured it in a widely watched episode. Blending investigative reporting with sharp critique, the episode portrayed the crime as more than a theft. It became a symbol of rebellion against the Federation's tight control over the industry. This framing sparked debates about the tension between regulation and free trade, introducing global audiences to the complexities of Canada's syrup market. While the public was fascinated, many producers viewed the romanticization of the heist with frustration. For them, it wasn't an amusing tale, but a serious crime that threatened their livelihoods. The stolen syrup injected millions into an already thriving black market, making regulation and enforcement even more challenging. The theft also highlighted broader industry issues, including the difficulties of maintaining stability in a globalized market. Despite the arrests, the heist left lingering mysteries. A significant portion of the syrup, worth millions, was never recovered. Some speculate it was smuggled abroad and sold internationally, while others believe it was mixed with legitimate stock and distributed through small-scale producers. The full extent of the operation and all its participants remain unclear, fueling speculation and intrigue. The legacy of the heist extends beyond the maple syrup industry. For the Federation, it was a wake-up call to improve security and adapt to changing times. For the public, it was a captivating story, a blend of audacity, ingenuity, and national symbolism. To this day, the Great Canadian Maple Syrup Heist stands as a cautionary tale about vulnerabilities in high-value industries and the unexpected places where crime can make its mark. The Great Canadian Maple Syrup Heist quickly transcended crime reports, becoming a cultural phenomenon. Documentaries, books, and articles like The Maple Syrup Heist, the sweetest crime in history, turned the story into a modern legend. These retellings often leaned into the humor of the theft, portraying the thieves as clever anti-heroes exploiting a flawed system. Late-night talk shows joked about liquid gold and black market pancakes, while memes flooded social media, cementing the heist's place in pop culture. However, not all reactions were lighthearted. Maple syrup producers who bore the financial loss criticized the romanticized portrayal of the crime. For them, it was a devastating blow, not a quirky caper. The Federation faced harsh scrutiny for its inability to prevent the theft, with some accusing it of prioritizing humor over accountability. This divide highlighted a broader issue: society's tendency to trivialize crimes when they feature ironic or unconventional elements. Unanswered questions further fueled the intrigue. Despite arrests, much of the stolen syrup, worth $12 million, remains missing. Theories suggest it was smuggled abroad, laundered through small producers, or absorbed into the black market. Moreover, the investigation left doubts about the true scale of the network, raising the possibility of additional accomplices who escaped justice. The heist also sparked deeper discussions about its motivations. Was it purely greed or a statement against the Federation's monopolistic controls? Many producers had long resented the Federation's strict pricing and production policies, and the crime revealed vulnerabilities in its centralized system. For some, the theft symbolized a rebellion against a powerful organization. For others, it was a stark reminder of the risks posed by unchecked ambition. In response, the Federation overhauled its security, installing surveillance cameras, tightening access, and introducing digital inventory tracking. These measures restored some confidence but couldn't erase the heist's lingering impact. For law enforcement, the case became a textbook example of modern organized crime's complexity, showcasing the need for interagency collaboration, advanced technology, and persistence. Even today, the heist is remembered as a story that blends audacity, humor, and moral questions. It exposed the fragility of high-value systems and highlighted the ingenuity of those who dared to exploit them. The Great Canadian Maple Syrup Heist remains one of the most audacious crimes of the 21st century, ensuring its place in history as both a cautionary tale and a cultural legend. The Great Canadian Maple Syrup Heist has transcended its criminal origins to become a cultural touchstone. Through documentaries, books, and extensive media coverage, the heist has been immortalized not just for its audacity, but for the enduring questions it left unanswered. For Canada, it remains both a moment of national embarrassment and a testament to resilience, showing how even the country's sweetest symbol could become the target of a meticulously planned crime. The legacy of the heist lies not only in the stolen syrup, but in the intrigue it continues to generate. Who truly reaped the rewards of this bold operation? What became of the missing syrup, and could a similar crime ever happen again? These lingering mysteries keep the story alive in the public imagination, serving as a powerful reminder of the ingenuity and ambition that drive even the most unconventional crimes.